So just when Tottenham feel like, we're building a bit of momentum, that all comes crashing down. A really, really disappointing defeat at home to relegation rivals Nottingham Forest. So let's get straight into Tottenham nil, Nottingham Forest 3, with the first ever guest appearance on the channel, Opta's very own Harry Clark. So joining us today is Opta's very own Harry Clark. Harry, how do you begin to pick the bones out of that? I mean, it's fun losing every week, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I just shock really from this afternoon. It's just I mean I went to the North London derby and you kind of I went there expecting a loss, but trying to trying to think right, we're gonna put in a decent performance, bit of effort, and I kind of did see that for an hour there, and but today it was just Forest, I mean, it's a cliche, but they clearly wanted it more, and they it was just I'm just still in a state of shock really because even though this is being recorded a few hours after, I was just sat there watching it and I was like, I can't believe it. Forest are leapfrogging Spurs, and if it wasn't for West Ham losing at Villa, Spurs would be in the bottom three.
Yeah,
So it's just unheard of. I mean, it's just this season's just been just calamitous ever since it felt like the City away game in August, where I mean the City away should just not be taken into account for any manager because it just seems like every manager can win now or win against City early in the season, and that just needs to be discounted from now on because for some reason Pep just can't beat Spurs, and now look at us and we're in bloody late March and a point and a place above the relegation zone, and it's West Ham who have got Wolves next, who everyone are beating at the moment, and all they have to do is beat Wolves at home. I know West Ham have been poor this season, but if they grab a win there, I'm looking at Spurs' fixtures. It's like Sunderland next. They'll be bouncing off the Derby win, and then I think it might be Brighton at home, and Brighton are just beating Liverpool. And it's just hard to see where the next win is. That's the scary thing because even though we've beaten Madrid in the Champions League, if if Madrid were happy with losing that by a goal, so you can say you can dress it up like we've beaten Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. Yes, it was a decent performance. Let's not shy from the fact that they lost a tie and Atletico Madrid were happy with that. They would have come here thinking, well, we can even lose by 2 goals. As long as we don't lose by that 3 goal margin, we're happy. And yeah, late penalty made it 3-2, but it's just, yeah, it's just papering over cracks for years now. And it's got to the point where even though the players are there, you just haven't got feels like even the experience of this relegation battle. I know a couple of them have been relegated, but these are much smaller clubs than Spurs, and I think possibly Oderberg was relegated. Archie Gray might have been relegated before, but let's not forget Archie Gray's still only 20 years old. He's just turned 20, and he's being tasked with coming up against Sangare and Anderson. I mean, Anderson's only really come into kind of the England squad in this last 12, 18 months, but he's got to be 23, 24. He's got that just experience of being in these type of games that Archie Gray just hasn't got. And when it's him and Sarr against Sangare and Anderson, they're always going to win the midfield battle today. So it just made no sense not having a Gallagher or a Palinha or even Bergval in earlier, because Bergval at least he runs and Gray. That's what I kind of wanted to start with. What I still don't know what Gray's best position is because he's played everywhere. He's played all across the back five. It feels like midfield, and then Atletico Madrid. He was playing some really nice, picking up some really nice positions in the 10, and it's just like where do you play him? And I think so many managers, um, Tudor and even Ange played him in a silly amount of positions. I mean, what do you think? What do you think Gray's best position is?
I'd say that his best game he's had so far was definitely Wednesday. Um,
Mm.
I think it's quite mad when you look at Archie Gray to think that he's played around 75 games for Tottenham now, and realistically, in his natural position as centre mid, we've probably seen that 10, 15 times. And I'm looking at the team, and yes, Gray didn't have a great game today, but he's showing a bit of like initiative, and Tell the same. But I'd say that all the sort of we had a lot of the ball, and I feel like the impetus of getting on top of them and pinning them back and really sort of dominating the ball, that was there from the team. I just think that this squad, the technical ability of it is just through the floor. It's really, really poor when you think of some of the players that we've had over the years, and I'm not saying that they need to be like Harry Kane's level of technical ability, but outside of maybe Romero, Madison, you know, Bergval maybe, the even things like Xavi Simmons, his weight of pass at times is really questionable, and I think generally that's a problem. I think when you've got Kulusevski out, you've got Madison out, and other key players like Kudus out, that's definitely not going to help. But we just after the Atletico Madrid game and the Liverpool game, if you're going to be cynical, you'd say that Liverpool have been poor all season really, and if they had better sort of cutting edge in attack, they would have beat us on Sunday. Atletico, again, if you're going to play devil's advocate, as you mentioned, they could go there and afford to lose 2-0 and they'd still go through. And I'm just, like you say, I'm struggling to think where our next win's coming from. And, I mean, even today, there's that shot from Tell, which Sel's put onto the bar, but I can't think of much else other than that. I know there's a late Solanke chance, but we just look completely toothless. And at the back, we just look vulnerable. And as you mentioned, Gray and Sarr got overran in midfield today, so there's a whole host of problems with us at the minute, and I can't see it getting better anytime soon.
No, no, I think 95% of Spurs fans would agree with you to that. It's just it's I don't want to sound like that kid on the news, but it's just upsetting.
It
Watching
is.
it
It
sometimes,
is.
it's just. I mean, you don't even need to go that far back. It's that Man City game that I mentioned before, and even though that wasn't a dominant performance, and City weren't on the back foot the whole time, it was still kind of you knew what you're going to get with them, and now you're just like, right, it's going to give it out to Poro on the right wing. He's going to put it back and then just a helpless ball, and you're just looking for scraps. And it's just like, surely Tudor's been there long enough now to really install something of note that you can actually see. And if we're sitting here after the Forest game and Forest had won 3-0, but Spurs have had 30 shots, 10 on target, and had 60% of the ball, then at least you can kind of grasp onto that yes, they've hit us on the counter 3 times or something, but we've dominated the game. I could see us going to Sunderland and grabbing something. Then you can kind of have that bit of positivity. But the performance is where it's most worrying because you can't even take any positivities from the game. And now you're going to Sunderland and you're like, right, they've got one of the best home records in the league. They're coming off a, one of their best wins. They're probably their best win of the season at St James's Park. They're going to be bouncing. They've got half a shot of Europe if it goes down to eighth or ninth, so they'll be well up for it. And they've already caused Spurs issues earlier in the season. I think Robbie got a late equaliser
Yeah.
in the home
Yeah, he
in
did.
the home
Yeah.
tie. So, and I mean, he's in good form. He bullied Tiao and Dan Burns today. I mean, God knows what he's going to do to Romero or Danso or Van der Ven. I mean, Van der Ven for me was very leggy today. He obviously stuck him left back. He plays there for Holland, doesn't he? But he just looked very slow. I think Hutchinson beat him for pace a couple of times, and you're just like, where's it? Where's his pace gone? And you're just like, I know he's had some niggles in the past, and he's played a lot of football. But you're just like that extra 5% effort that they had when they were kind of in that Madrid game, and even at Liverpool, they're just not getting that for these home games against the so-called smaller clubs that they should be getting up for, because realistically they're their rivals this season, and you just like I just can't see a win aside from, I mean, the two games we might be going to is the Everton and Leeds games. Those are the two where you're like, wow, they're must wins, because I can't see us picking anything up more in a draw than anywhere else, really. I don't know if you have a look at the fixture list. Can you see any other wins?
I'd say, looking at the fixtures, as you mentioned, that Everton game, the last game of the season, the weekend before we've got, Chelsea away, which essentially is a write-off because, we never take points from there. And so then in terms of games that can get you points to keep you up, then that sort of gap or that pool that you sort of pick from is a lot smaller. And I think our next three games, Sunderland away, Brighton at home, Wolves away, I think we need probably about 9 points to keep us up. I'd say anything less than two wins in those three games, then I think we are going to go down. And I think the worrying thing at the minute is you're watching Spurs, and aside from that sort of game against Atletico, where there's less jeopardy on Atletico's side in terms of like losing by like a one goal margin. I'm just looking at the team, and it looks similar to how it was under Thomas Frank. I mean, a huge issue we've seen this season, which I don't think's really been spoke about, is just square pegs and round holes. So having, yes, Jed Spence can deputise at left back, but it sort of is a bit of a hindrance if he's your only left-sided choice available. I know Udogi's had injuries, but things like that, just in terms of how you build up, that can slow it down. I mean, even today, Van der Ven at left back, yes, he's played there for Holland, but he's not, played there a lot for Spurs. And why, if Udogi was fit enough to come off the bench, why would you not start with him? And even coming on to the other substitutes, Bergval coming on and sort of, I think he's been the victim of all of this, really. The idea that he's some sort of right midfielder in a 4-4-2 is just, it's just stupid. I don't see why. I think the way he's been managed this season has been terrible in terms of, firstly, Frank was seeing him as, a bit of a number 10, but he's better from deeper. His best football that he's played in a Spurs shirt has been as sort of part of a midfield three or playing a little bit deeper. And he's coming on and playing right midfield, and you're thinking, what are we trying to? What's the game plan here? And then Javi Simmons coming on playing on the left. I thought he was quite poor, to be honest, when he come on. Maybe I'm just sort of still emotional. I can't really recall too much he'd done, but didn't really make a difference. And another issue I have as well is, the Atletico game was without a doubt the best performance we put in this calendar year. And then Simmons, who's instrumental in that, Kolo Muani, who's instrumental in that, both dropped. And then you're going from a back three, which, really played on the front foot as a home team, and reverting back to this sort of 4-4-2 that we've seen at Anfield, last week. And, you know, where's the consistency? I understand you can't, it's not necessarily to say that we're going to play the exact same football that we did against Atletico, but we're in a state at the minute where even that Atletico game, even though we went out, that was just relief because that was one of the only positives we've had in this calendar year. And you sort of think when you've had so little to grasp onto, when you've now put in that sort of performance against an Atletico team which we've seen wipe the floor of Barcelona, why would you not stick with that? It just confuses me.
I totally agree. It totally baffled me when I saw the team, and I mean, I thought Vicario was going to be out anyway with the hernia, and I'm not sure whether he's having that
I think
looked
he's
at.
having it this after the Forest game. The club tweeted.
Yeah, so it will be Kinski from from after the international break. So I mean, that's the least of the concerns at the moment. But I was totally baffled because obviously it was a good performance at Liverpool. It was a good point, and on the on the balance of things in the second half, a point was probably deserved, I think, because
Yeah.
Liverpool sat back and kind of invited Spurs on, and yeah, it was a bit of a fluky finish, but I think they deserved it. And then the the Madrid game was how the approach should have been for Forest today, because the approach for Madrid was, yeah, we have to win, and not just that, it was win by 3 goals, and obviously you didn't have to win by 3 goals today, but you just need to have a look at it and be like, right, we need to win this game. Even a draw is just, it's not going to get any fans off our back because we're like, all right, we're drawing to 18th in the league. That's not going to help anyone, especially home where we've got this amazing record in Europe at, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And it comes to the Premier League, and I can't make sense of it. And it's an unbelievable, one of the best in Europe. And then you get into the Premier League, and it's like Forest are coming here and winning 3-0, and you're just like, why? The three at the back, Van der Ven is a perfect player to play that left centre back role, and Romero and Danso, he likes playing Danso. I think he didn't have the greatest game, I didn't think, but he's got that long throw, and it's just, I think it was mentioned on commentary actually how he took off Van der Ven because Dancer's got the long throw. You can't think like that in the Premier League.
And how
Because
often have we actually seen goals come from that long throw? I feel like about
exactly,
25% of our season has just been some like 14-year-old chucking the ball to Danso to draw off. You know,
yeah,
I think the closest we come was it Atletico or today, I can't remember the header where it like sort of hit the like stanchion between like crossbar and
yeah,
post. But other than
yeah, from
that, it's just
Richarlison,
been
yeah.
it's been not easy on the eye and crap generally in terms of how effective it is.
Yeah, you get it if you're in League Two or the conference where, yeah, these long throws are a lot more potent, and I think even someone like Brentford, where they got the best long throw in the league in Coyote, I think they've only scored 3 or 4 all season from throw-ins, and that's over 20, 30, it was 31 games I think now. So they're scoring one every 7 or 8 games, and you're like, right, am I going to keep on Danso or Van der Ven, who is, I mean, no doubt a better player, but I mean, I think Bruno came out after and said that he was leggy, Van der Ven, and that's why they made the tactical change of bringing on Udogie. But it's just like, it's just utterly frustrating watching. I mean, I like Dancer. There's a few likable players in there, but likable's not going to keep you up. And it's just finding that balance of, yeah, we're going to play like this at Anfield and then play like this at home at Atletico Madrid. I just don't see how he's reverted back to the Liverpool one and gone, all right, because Forest were never going to dominate the ball today.
No.
And you looking, and it's just, I mean, Anderson was just absolutely everywhere today, and it's just exactly what Spurs are missing is someone that's just. I mean, Gallagher's meant to be that, but it's just like Gallagher of 3 or 4 years ago, maybe not even that. It was obviously in the England squad, playing for Chelsea or playing for Madrid, and I mean, him at Palace, he was unbelievable. But buying players on performances from 2 or 3 years ago isn't going to do it anymore. And when you're looking at some of your other players to step up, and you're looking towards an Archie Gray, I know he's played 70 odd games, but he, he's still young. I mean, obviously us growing up, he's 5 years younger than us,
Mm.
and I feel as mature as I did when I was 15. So I don't get how you can put all this on a 20-year-old. I know he's got that experience, but at the end of the day, he's just turned 20, and he's being tasked with kind of. I mean, Anderson will probably be in the Premier League team of the season this year, and you're tasking Archie Gray, who has played games at centre half, right wing back this season, and then it's not as easy as just shuffling him, and he's going to fit like a glove, and it's just, I'm just totally baffled by it still, and That's the frustrating thing because you can see the performances, even like 40 minute spells from the Madrid game where you're just like, how is this Spurs team like struggling in
Mm.
and it could be playing championship football next season. It's just like if you said this at the start of the year, you just be I mean, you wouldn't even be laughed at, you'd be put into a psych ward and measured for all sorts of things and you're just like it's just absolutely baffling and like you said, square pegs and round holes at the moment. And it just feels like now more than ever you just need players playing in their best position. And I mean, Tudor's he plays three at the back. That's his thing. It's three at the back. So it's not as if like I know that Liverpool performance could have been the worst thing that happened because he's now going to look at that and be like, all right, I need to play 4-4-2 now. And then it could be a blessing in the opposite of a blessing in disguise. I don't know what the opposite is, but
Uh,
it's
I don't know. But
no, but it's just
there
it's
must be a
just
word for it. But
yeah. But I'm not. I don't think either of us are intelligent enough to think about it at the moment. But
well,
I
speak
think
for yourself.
yeah.
I,
But I mean that kind of brings us on to whether Tudor is the right man because we've seen from a couple of performances in the last week where okay, he's had a bit more time, he could be the man, and then from not even from the start of the game, from when the team sheet came out, you're like, does he actually understand? And I mean, I'm I'm on the fence at the moment, but I don't know if you're kind of got more feelings stronger than me.
um, it's a it's a really tough one. I just want to say I thought you'd nibble at that that last comment. You probably were right in terms of the intelligence, but just like before I get on to Tudor, that like you mentioned about the Atletico, how we were just able to like sort of seamlessly, sort of cut through them at will. I think, we've not been the only English team which has struggled in the Champions League this round. I think it's been pretty evident that we've across the board been quite poor, but it just feels like physicality in the Premier League, and I think it's an issue which is wider than just Tottenham. I think it's more to do with where the Premier League's going. It's almost like, physicality has sort of that's become the priority over technical quality. And, maybe it was physically Atletico couldn't deal with us. Maybe that's what it is. But ultimately, their technical quality put them through. But things like the long throw ins, I think that's like it's just in fashion at the minute, and it almost feels like if you don't have someone that can throw the ball 30 yards or whatever, then you're behind. It's just a bugbear I've got with football in general at the minute. But in terms of Tudor, it's such a hard one because he's been obviously dealt a very bad hand in terms of the injuries and things like that. But then, as we mentioned, why if you found a winning formula, why would you go back to that? And Um, yeah. So if you found something that works, why have you not stuck with it? And we're running out of games quickly, and when it gets to the point where you know all these sort of names are being mooted about maybe temporarily taking charge of Spurs, there comes a point where if you are going to do that, I think our next game's the 12th of April, so that's give or take 3 weeks. Now would be the time to do it, and I think if they are going to do it, they'll do it between now and then. But as we mentioned, it just doesn't look any different from Frank, barring the last sort of week we've had, where that's been the best week of 2026 for Spurs, and it was a win which didn't see us go through, and a point which yes, hard fought, and we deserved the point in the end, but it could have easily gone a different way. So I'm really struggling. I mean, I don't know how many more interviews I can see of Harry Redknapp saying he'd take the job. But I'm at the point where I'm like, if Redknapp was to come in, and then you might have someone like Mason, you know, as a number two. It's a sort of mix of old school and new school. And, you know, these are not bad players. They won a European trophy less than 12 months ago. I think it's around 10 months ago. And I'm struggling to see A, who'd sort of come in on a temporary basis if it wasn't to be like someone like Redknapp or Mason, and B, like, has the time already gone? Was did was the chance to save us from relegation someone instead of Tudor in the first place? I don't know. I quite like him on just a human level. I think some of the questions that he gets asked about, sort of, who's going to be next Spurs manager, and some of the narrative around him saying, is it time for Tottenham to get to, bite the bullet with Tudor and sack him? Where was that energy for Thomas Frank, who, had 26 games and left us in 16th, and then get Tudor's first game was against an Arsenal team which, are top of the league and ultimately, rolled us over. But, you know, having just that sympathy for him on a human level isn't going to be enough to save us from relegation. And I'm really in two minds because it feels like if there was one more game before the international break, that would have been perfect. So if we played Sunderland next week and we lost, I think then would be the time to go, right, now you sack him and get someone else in. But again, whoever comes in is going to have, well, I don't think, like, for example, it'd be Mason, is whoever comes in, if they don't turn it around, will be tasked with being the manager that got Spurs relegated. And I think someone like Ryan Mason doesn't need that on his CV. He's already done two interim spells. But I just don't know. I feel a bit agnostic to it all, to be honest. But I don't know if you feel like you're one side or the other in particular.
I think it would it would literally have to be the next couple of days for me, like you said, where yeah, give whoever it is 2 or 3 weeks before their first game. I know a lot of them will be away in South America or elsewhere in Europe, but at least kind of some of the core group will still be at Hotspur Way, and just have a look at them. And I think if it was, I'd go with Mason. I know he failed at West Brom, um,
But then
but
since then, Eric Ramsey's also gone in and inherited the exact same problem. So that's not
yeah,
necessarily to say I won't say I've watched loads of West Brom this season, but I don't think necessarily that's a slight on him in the same way that I think Frank will probably get a job after us and it won't really affect him that much. But so
exactly. Yeah, I think with, I mean, I could say I hadn't watched West Brom much, but I watched them yesterday at City. I went down there, and is James Morrison's taken over, and he's been there about 5 games now, and they won against Hull last week, and then they came to Bristol City yesterday, and they played them off the park. Should have been 2 or 3 nil, and they beat them 1-0. And you're just like, you can kind of take parallels from it. Former midfielder from the team. I know Mason's not as much of a legend at Spurs as Morrison is at West Brom, but he's gone in there. They they played City off the park. City were playoffs 3 or 4 weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, yeah, maybe a couple of months ago. And you're looking at them and you're like, right, so he's turned it around. He's got very little managerial experience. Mason can come back into Spurs. I know he didn't have the greatest of times at West Brom, and obviously didn't do well enough in his first couple interim spells to get the job permanently. But he'll know the players. He'll know them, and if you get him in before the Sunderland game, he scored a winner once, didn't he, away at Sunderland? So you can always bring him on with 10 minutes to go if worst comes to worst. Get him a skull cap or something and see what he can do in that midfield, because I've run out of ideas, and I'm sure Spurs, the Spurs hierarchy might well be running out of ideas as well. I can't see Redknapp going in there as much as he's pushing it himself. I think it would it would be a massive risk, but I suppose what's to lose?
yeah,
Because what's the what's going to happen either way? I mean, I personally would give Tudor the rest of the season, because I think he's not earned it. I'd say as such, but you've seen glimmers, and I've seen. I don't want to sound like Robbie Cundy, but I can't remember what phrase he
It's
used,
seen
but
encouraging signs.
I've seen encouraging signs, and I wouldn't go that far saying encouraging signs, but I've seen glimmers where, yeah, they seem to be putting in effort for him, but it's just when you're coming up against Forest where they're kind of doing this year after year, aside from obviously they went to Europe, but that was something else they're fighting for, and it feels like it's not really sunk into a few of the Spurs players where you're like, right, okay, we're actually in a bit of trouble here. Like, I know they're looking around the dressing room and seeing players that were being called world class 2 or 3 years ago, possibly, and now you're looking at them and like, right, I could be having a 50% wage cut next season, playing in the championship. They just don't seem to know the reality of the situation, and it's just I that's probably why I'd give Tudor. You got to blame the players at some point, and I think a new manager is too much of a risk for me. And I think Tudor, with his performances in the last week, if you're ignoring today, I think someone just needs to drill into him. Right, let's just stick to one, three or four at the back. Maybe the three at the backs for your games where you're at home, you're expected to dominate the ball, and then for these games, maybe even Sunderland, go four at the back against Sunderland. Don't go four at the back at home to Forest, where they. I honestly I can't put it into words. I looked at the team and I was just like, what is he doing? And then after half time, you're just like, right, okay, he's clearly got it wrong, and he just didn't switch early enough. Oh, did he even switch at all? Back to three at the back, he didn't, did he? He just put
No,
a
I
dozy
don't
left
think he
back,
did. No.
and he put Poro right wing, and you're just like, it's just absolutely baffling. So I'm probably contradict myself 2 or 3 times in this one monologue, but
Mm.
overall, I would stick with him just because he's got experience, and you've seen those very faint glimmers of quality, and I mean, there's no doubt the players have got quality, but that can only do so much when all these other players are fighting for their lives. Because Forest go down, there's not going to be people queuing up for these players, so they're fighting for their contract. They're fighting to be Premier League footballers. Romero, Van der Ven, pretty much that whole back four, all the attackers, they'll find new clubs. Easy as anything. Obviously, a relegation on the CV doesn't look good for anyone, but people aren't going to not pick up these players because they got a relegation. They'll be able to pick them up on the cheap as well. So they'll be like, their agents will be telling them, no doubt, all right, obviously, we'd rather you didn't have a relegation on your CV, but worst comes to worst, so and so from Leipzig or um, any other to Dortmund or these Atletico Madrids, these teams that Spurs should be fighting against, like they did last week, they'll be picking up these players on the cheap, and then they'll be performing again next season, and they'll be like, "Is this the best team to ever go down?" And it will be, no doubt, it will be the best,
Do you
probably
reckon?
the highest quality of players. Probably not as a team as a whole, because they're clearly not playing as a team at the moment.
I,
But these quality of players, where I think we'll look back in 5, 10 years' time, where you're like, bloody hell, do you remember that Spurs team that went down, Bergvall? Like all these young players, I know Bergvall, Gray, they're young players, but you're looking at Romero, he's like best defender in a World Cup winning team. I mean, one of their best players in that run. I know, again, that was years ago now, 2022, 4 years ago, whatever. And then you got Van der Ven, who's like linked with Liverpool and Real Madrid every other week. And you got those two, and yeah, they've missed time, but on the whole, they've been available for a decent chunk of the season. So it's not as if like it was last season, where it seemed like they were available once every 2 or 3 weeks at one point. And then you got so much. I mean, Kolo Muani, like he played in that World Cup final, albeit he missed a sitter to win it for him. But you're just sitting there like these are quality players. Simons, when apparently snubbed Chelsea to come Spurs, and you're just like, okay, he's coming here. He was mo monumental in the World Cup, sorry, in the Euros, and he obviously scored that screamer against England. So he's pretty much he's very sought after. And then obviously Solanke, he's still getting in the England squad over Watkins, who scored today. And you're just like, oh, Solanke, whatever your opinions of him is, he's a very good Premier League striker. You saw that when he scored 18 or 19 for Bournemouth. And then obviously you've got all the players. There's quite a lot of attackers out injured, but that's no excuse for not scoring against Forest, where their centre halves, yeah, they're good in the air and whatnot, but you need to get something in on them because they just they bullied everyone, and Anderson bullied everyone, Sangare bullied everyone, and it's just not that fight where you're seeing from these Andersons and Sangares where even though like those two, they probably be able to pick up Premier League clubs no doubt next season if Forest go down, but it's just all about mentality at that point because quality only gets you so far, and I don't sound like I'm preaching because I'm sat at home and I'm not a professional footballer and I never have been, and I probably never will be. But I mean, I don't want to rule out my playing career, but
Yeah,
it's just
World Cup
it.
coming up.
Yeah, you never know. I've got the alarm set on my phone anyway, but it's just it's just common sense. It's like quality can only get you so far, and they've just not got. They're not playing as a team, and then they're just not trying hard. Like it's all well and good running a lot, but when you're running like a headless chicken around the pitch for 90 minutes, they've just got that. They've not even got any football in nous. It feels like where it's just. And there's so many players from that team, and you can't always refer back to that first 10 games under Ange, but there's a lot of players still there from that team, and that team looked unbeatable. I know it's only a 10 game, but 10 games is a lot in the grand scheme of things.
It's
Like,
over a quarter of the season.
exactly. And you're looking at that, and I mean, all that back four were available today, and it's just, I, I honestly, I could speak for hours about it, and then I'm just like, what is actually going on? Because you're thinking there's quality players. There's clearly a decent manager. Like he's clearly not a stupid bloke. He's and I, it's clearly the fans were unbelievable to start the game. They were getting. I mean, I got very much most of the time I do get goosebumps when I listen to the Come On You Spurs and when the Spurs were marching in at the start of the game, and obviously I wasn't there today, but you can still hear it so loud through the TV. It's mad, and when you look at that, and it felt like a lot more people were in white today as well because the weather was nice, and you look at that South stand, it's like, how can you not play for that?
Mm.
And obviously that's going to be half empty next season if Spurs somehow manage to go down, and it's just looking more and more likely from every other game, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And the worst thing about it, I've said it on here a few times, is that ultimately it's going to be the fans that are going to have to pick up the pieces. And as you mentioned, the likes of Van der Ven, Romero, probably a lot more than people realise of this squad is going to move on if we go down. And even people like Archie Gray. I mean, if Bayern Munich are sniffing around him, like there's been reports that they have been, and other sort of Premier League teams, then there's no guarantee that it will stay. More than likely, even the players we don't think will go will end up going. And again, it's the fans who bear the brunt of it. It's us who today, like we have, for so many points of the season, showed unbelievable support. I can remember Newcastle away. Vicario's name was pretty much sung for 90 minutes after that Fulham game. And ultimately, there's been this sort of narrative of, players coming out, say, or having like altercations with fans and then saying like, oh yeah, we know who the real fans are. Thomas Frank even saying shit like that. And you're like, well, you get paid to play, we pay to watch, and it's shit. Like ultimately, like in the modern game, fans are becoming more and more customers to football clubs rather than supporters. And if it was a different industry and you were getting a service that you didn't feel was right for the price you pay, it would be much different. But football clubs work a lot differently. Where I don't think 40,000 season ticket holders are going to get a refund if we go down. But it's just it's so many spinning plates that have contributed to this. I think even when you look at our team, in terms of the recruitment, it just feels a bit like I wouldn't say it's it happens often enough to call it scattergun, but there just seems to be no fault in it whatsoever. There's links in January with Crescencio Somerville, who yes, he's gone on to do well, but he's another sort of player who I think there's so many players in the squad like this where they've ultimately come in quite young, and because there's not been senior figures in the dressing room since Kane's gone or Son's gone, we've just not seen the best of them, and probably won't in the Spurs shirt. I think players like Matisse Tell, I think whilst he's getting better, I wouldn't quite say he's hit the ground running at Spurs, but if you come into a team which was a lot more secure, had more leadership, and they weren't necessarily thrown into the deep end like players like Archie Gray and Bergvall were last year, then they probably would have you know done better. And ultimately, it comes down to the board in terms of them sticking with Frank for too long. And if we do go down, then appointing Tudor, that would be on the board as well. But just the gall they've got, to leak these stuff to the press in like November, December to say Spurs are prioritising a left winger. They want a centre back or left back. Yes, we got Salza. They want a midfield addition. Yes, we got Gallagher. But again, it's the wrong profile. It almost is like sort of they're just picking players' names off of paper and not necessarily doing their research. Even as far back as Dragusin, he was meant to be one of these Johan Langer sort of data-led signings. I don't know what data they were looking at. Like, I don't want to like just rip into Dragusin because he wasn't even playing today. But it's just an example, and even in January, Robertson, you can sort of see the logic behind it, but you know when Salza was pretty much lined up anyway, and they put out this big sort of front about wanting a left winger, and that was going to be their priority. About round mid December, everyone knew that Semenyo was going to Man City. So even before the window opens, you should have time to find an alternative. And I'm looking even Adamola Lookman, he was available. I mean, yes, he probably would choose Atletico over Spurs in our current plight, but it's a different story back in January. And every single aspect of this relegation will be down to the board. The players, yes, they'll take some responsibility, and there's no excuse for them to be, you know, bereft of any sort of blame, because ultimately this is the team which, over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, has been there or thereabouts in terms of qualifying for Europe. But we under Enoch we just settle, and it's something that I can go as far back to primary school when you know Nelson and Saha were brought in when we were I think 2 points off top and playing some of the best football in years under Redknapp. Then Pochettino, his first window, we wanted Schneiderlin, got Stambouli, wanted Masaccio, got Fazio, and those were the early signs. And then even when he's built credit in the bank, there's still no real signings that would take us over the line. I mean, he went 2 windows without, not without even signing a player, and still managed to get us to, within touching distance of the biggest prize in club football. And then he did get back in, and then when he got that back in, because it didn't work out after a few months, he was gone. And then Mourinho let down, Conte let down, Ange let down, as he's publicly said on the overlap, saying that when it comes to paying the wages, we won't go that extra mile. And I look at the club at the minute and I think Langer left Villa. They've got so much better in terms of recruitment and on the pitch. Venkatesham, not really sure the timeline of when he went, but he left Arsenal and they're in a better space than us. Thomas Frank, when he was there, left Brentford and went to a better team, um, at least on paper, but ultimately that didn't translate. And then I'm looking at it behind the scenes and I'm thinking, who are the football people in the club? Because Paratici, whatever sort of involvement he had during his sort of suspended sort of global ban, he comes back in, I think it's November, and then in January we signed Gallagher and Sousa, which isn't enough. And he, announces that he's leaving and going to Fiorentina, who've managed to mysteriously sign 6 players and turn a season round and get out of a relegation battle. And there's been stuff about, apparently it was Vivian Lewis's son-in-law who was you know advising Venkatesham to sack him, and that's someone with no prior football experience. And we've got rid of people like David Pleat, you know, who have found gems like Huddleston, Bale, Lennon, Genus, who went on to have big careers at Spurs. And we've seen some of the names that he's reportedly sort of suggested to Spurs, likes of Eze, Tony, Bowen, um, Adam Wharton. And I know it's easy to sort of say that in hindsight, but ultimately, like, I'm looking around the club and thinking we are in dire straits right now, and at the most important point in our Premier League history, we've just seemingly got no one with any sort of football acumen in charge, and everything that has led us down this road has been the board's fault. And I just, unfortunately, it is going to be the fans who are going to have to pick up the pieces next year. We've done our part today, and rival fans will laugh, but when the team needed the fans, we were there, and we've just not got that back, and it's been a one-way relationship all season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think these next couple of months are going to be huge, not for the next couple of years, but it could be huge for the next 10, 20 years of Tottenham Football Club, because you're looking, and obviously if the worst were to happen and Spurs go down, it's not cut and dry of, all right, we'll just go straight back up. We've got the best players, we've got the best facilities. It's not going to be that easy. I mean, you've seen from over the years, even when Spurs were doing well, Middlesbrough in the cup, I think it was Josh Coburn scored and they knocked him out. Colchester,
Sheffield United,
obviously, Sheffield United. I mean, you're looking at them, and the Championship's better than ever in terms of quality, I believe, because you're getting these 3 teams that have just come up, and it's looking like, I mean, Sunderland will stay up. Leeds could easily stay up. Obviously, Burnley, even though they got 100 points last year in the Championship, they're looking like they're going to go down. Then when you've got Wolves in there, Burnley, you've got 100 points just 2 seasons ago, and you've got all. It's going to be everyone's biggest game. It's going to be at Spurs, and when their home form has been this bad this year, it's not as easy as just, all right, we'll get 100 points and stay up. We'll play a back four of like Souza, Vuskovic. Vuskovic isn't going to stay.
no.
He could be that one, like Spurs, like if you're doing a Sporkle quiz or something, you're like, all right, this Croatian defender, oh, it must be Vuskovic. Oh, he's never played for Spurs.
Mm.
I mean, we've seen him score at Reading in a
And assist
friendly,
and get one off the line in about 15 minutes. Probably his
and
only
yeah,
ever Spurs appearance.
exactly. And you're just like, he's not going to stay. It's not as easy as just playing the youth players as well, because a front three or something of Scarlett, Williams, Barnett, and Moore, that's not going to score you 80, 90 goals that you need to score in the championship.
Mm.
It's nice to think about playing all these youngsters and having Olasesi and Ajayi and all these youngsters that you can get really good minutes in the championship next season, and you can have a nice little away days at grounds you wouldn't think you'd ever go to, and it's looking like Lincoln could be one of them. And you're just like, well, it's easier. It's so much easier said than done, because as such a tough league, and when it's going to be everyone's big game, like I said, and going to these grounds and I mean, you saw Tamworth only last season, National League South, and you're just like that was only after extra time, wasn't it? It was 2 or 3 nil after extra time, and you're sitting there like, all right, if we're going to struggle at Tamworth next year, where they weren't anywhere near as bad as they have been this season, you're like, all right, it's not going to be as easy as going straight back up. And what if they do have 2 or 3 seasons in the championship? That's going to have an effect for the next 10, 15 years at least, because you're going to fall behind everybody. And yes, you'll have a lot more money coming in every week, but saying that, it's a 60,000 seater stadium. That's that's not going to be anywhere near full in the
No.
championship. And there's teams that have 30, 40k stadiums in the championship, and worst comes to worst, Spurs might not have the highest attendance in that league next year. And obviously, if they do go down, but the only reason they would do is because everyone's taking 3 or 4k there, because it's going to be their only ever chance of going there.
Mm.
Or they think it'd be their only ever chance of going there. But I think if Spurs go down, they will not come straight back up. But unless they somehow chuck a stupid amount of money at it and say to these fringe players at the moment, right, you got free promotion on the CV here if you can just stay an extra season. We're obviously going to be in the Premier League next season, then we can push on from there. They're going to have to chuck a stupid amount of money at it and lose a lot of money next season, which they probably would do anyway, but it's just how much they're willing to lose to come straight back up. Because I don't think, exactly like you said, they're not football men up in the hierarchy. They don't know how hard it's going to be coming up next season if worst case scenario does happen. So I think I'm just as worried to get relegated as I am next season when it comes to August. What actual 11 can be put out there on the first game of the season?
Like part of me just thinks like I'd love for us just to say like, look, you've got us in this mess. You're going to get us out of it. And you know, I don't think it's been a conscious effort of just not trying, but like you mentioned earlier about agents saying, look, you might have a relegation on your CV, but it's an easier way to a Barcelona or even some of our sort of fringe players to someone like Napoli. And there's definitely been people who haven't been up to standard. I think largely across the board. But part of me would just love just to say, no, do you know what? You don't realise not only the financial implications at the club, but how it affects people day to day. I mean, like you mentioned, the financial impacts, but you know, Spurs weren't shy in lockdown, in terms of being hesitant with furlough, and I think they had to make a U-turn. And people who at the start of the year were walking into the training ground seeing this Europa League trophy might not even have a job there next year, because with relegation comes cuts, sacrifices, and it's not just from a financial aspect. So, you know, part of me really does want them just to say, you know what, you get us out of it and then you can leave. When we're up back in the Premier League, then you can go and we rebuild. And it would be a hard reset that I think a relegation would be a hard reset for us, which that I don't even see it as a benefit, but it would be all of Enoch's chickens coming home to roost for just constantly neglecting the team, not building on it when it's strong, and seemingly not building on it now that we're not strong. And it's just arrogance to think that because we're Tottenham, that we couldn't go down. But ultimately, I think a lot of the players in the team will have sort of egos that are above their station and think, yeah, I could get to this level. But ultimately, I mean, if we look for our best players, and I'm not saying that these are the people necessarily thinking that they're better than us, but Romero, if you're gonna play devil's advocate, you'd say bit of a hothead, probably couldn't hang your hat on him over the course of a season. Obviously, in the Europa League, he was brilliant last year and won Player of the Season. Van der Ven, I mean, there's ultimately a reason he's at Spurs. We picked him up and it's looked like a great deal for us. And I think even if we were to go down, you'd still look at back and say that's a good deal for Spurs. But ultimately, there's a reason that these players are at Spurs and not at a bigger team. And I also think that there's that, and I also think there's probably an element of some players that come to Spurs and think, well, this will be the pinnacle of my career. You know, I think someone like Solanke, and I'm not saying that it's anything to do with his attitude, but someone who's his sort of age and makes a sort of big move to Spurs, that probably will be the one big move they get in their career. And it's almost like psychologically they're quite happy with where they are, and there's not the jeopardy of them getting replaced because our board just won't go that extra mile. And we're just in disarray. But hand hand on heart now, do you think that on the 24th of May, Spurs will be relegated? Not necessarily on that day, but when the full time whistle goes in the season, do you think we'll be a Premier League club or not?
I think we'll stay up. I I don't know whether it's delusion or it's still not me getting over the reality that Spurs are in a relegation fight. I think something will happen over these next 2 or 3 weeks where whether it be a managerial change or the leadership, I don't know is part of the player leadership group at the moment. I know there was a clear one under Ange where it was Son, Madison, and Romero, was it?
Yeah, I think
And
so. Yeah,
yeah, you knew those three were kind of the team leaders, and obviously Son's not here anymore, but whether it be a few of the players coming out and bringing out statements and just something will happen over these next couple of weeks where I'm sure of it, where it'll give the fans something to cling on to, whether that be Mason coming in or a group of players coming out and then the Sunderland game, like something just needs to happen before these last 5 games and whenever the Wolves game is, because that Wolves game, they could be all but down by then, so that they will be. You can't ask for an easier game, like because it's such a high quality league at the moment. All these teams in like 11th and 12th, like Sunderland's and Newcastle's, they'll have delusions of still being able to get European football with all these European coefficients where we're getting extra Champions League play somehow. They'll be going down to the Conference League at like ninth maybe, and when you're 3 or 4 places off that, you're going to have that thing to aim for. So there's only going to be a very small group of teams not playing for anything come May. And when you've got someone like Everton, where their top half, they could be fighting for Europe on the last day. You don't want it to go to the last day, especially with Everton, Moyes. They've got that feel good factor at the moment. They've, I mean, they've got better quality. At the end of the day, their attack is just better at the moment. And Dye would walk into this Spurs team. I mean, obviously their strikers, Beto and Barry, been pretty hit and miss, but this isn't an Everton podcast. But what I'm trying to say is, I think Spurs need to do something over these next couple of weeks to ensure that they've got the best chance of staying up. And it needs to happen sooner or later because it feels like, all right, Spurs are over these last few weeks. Yeah, Spurs are down there, but we've got plenty of time to go. We've got 2 or 3 months to go. And suddenly now it's kind of hitting you, and you're just like, there's not long to go at all, and just need something to happen. And because the way it's going, yeah, I'll hand on heart saying if nothing changes, if Tudor's still here and no Spurs players come out and say something, or the club even brings out a statement, or just anything that tries to bring the club together because it's never been more split since, I mean, since I've been watching them. Obviously, you've watched them a whole lot longer than I have, and I'm half the fan, not even that, of what you are. But this is far more split than I've ever seen it. So they just need something to happen because if you ask me the question of if everything stayed as it is and Tudor's managing in that Everton game, and nothing's happened in terms of the club or the player leadership group, then I'd say we won't be going to the Everton game because Spurs will already be down, or Spurs will need a win, and I'll be like, no, there's no point paying 80 quid for the train from Bristol to London because I know if Everton are playing for summer, they will win that day. They will win that day for sure. So I think staying as it is, yeah, I think Spurs will get relegated, but I think something will happen over these next couple of weeks where it'll put my mind not at ease because it's not going to be at ease until it's mathematically impossible. But I do think Spurs will stay up and something will happen. But I don't know if you're as delusional, I'd say, as I. But
Oh, I'm probably far more delusional. Um, but just in terms of us staying up, I think again, like you mentioned, it literally is down to what happens sort of in the lead up to the Sunderland game and what happens after that. I think if we stick with Tudor, I think we're probably gonna go down. Um, and well, I don't know actually because I think as a club we've just got this inherent sort of like built-in DNA of just snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and I sort of think like the players just won't be used to this, and it's one thing, you know, trying to climb up the ladder of the Premier League and getting into Champions League and winning trophies, but once you start slipping down, you know, it's like a snowball effect essentially in terms of the momentum, and we're even if I think if you look at from before that Newcastle game to now, we're now a point above the relegation zone, and at the minute, I I think we probably are going down. Unless something significant changes, I think we're going down. And that I'd love to feel the opposite way, but I just can't shake that feeling. I think I text you after the Fulham game and said we're down. Like we are going down. But you've also got the signs of the last two games where we have showed some fight, and I think a lot of it's just gonna come down to that. But I think the fact that that's really only been the only positive to come from 2026 from a Spurs perspective. I think we might go, but yeah.
I
Thank
can't believe we're talking about this. I
yeah,
honestly can't believe we're talking about this. It's just unbelievable. I mean, like as good as the Champions League group stage was, or whatever the league phase, like I just thought, right, they're clearly doing it like last season where they're focusing on Europe because it's the Champions League. They can get all psyched up for the Champions League games, so it's there.
mm,
Like the Dortmund win was great. Like they barely conceded in the Champions League, aside from obviously that PSG game, which bit of a write-off, but it's just so there's clear signs. That's what I'm kind of holding on to at the moment, and I just honestly I can't believe we're still talking about this. I thought it was a kind of little joke in February where you're like, "God, Spurs could go down, couldn't they?" It's like, yeah, they'll turn it around now, and now I think today, maybe before for some people, but I think since after the Liverpool game, people were like, okay, they've got some here. And now this Forest game, you'll see everyone talking about it next week. Where I mean, I think they're the bookies' favourites now, Spurs, to go down out of that little group
yeah,
between West Ham and Forest and Leeds and whoever else you want to chuck in there. And I think Villa away is another game possibly in May. So aside from that, anomaly a couple of seasons ago, under Ange. I just can't see them because Villa will be playing for something. So just feels like I, j- I, it does just feel like everything's aligned in the worst possible way, where Spurs will be playing Championship football next season.
yeah. I think so. Um, Thank you for joining me, Harry. A
Yeah,
cracking Cockerel Talk debut, the first guest on the channel, and couldn't have picked anyone better.
yeah. Couldn't have picked more of a waffler.
Yeah, and I've it feels a bit therapeutic. I've got a lot out of my system there, so thank you for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, no worries. I'm here to
And
help.
also, wasn't the only football on today. Uh,
Mhm.
don't know if you're aware. Um, Elsewhere across London, Arsenal is just too big for you boys, and you don't like it up 'em. When it's a big occasion, you don't like it up 'em. Have a fucking bowl of that, mate. Have a bowl of that.
You
But yeah,
really do love to see it, don't you?
you gotta take some sort of positive. But
Absolutely. Yeah, this podcast wouldn't be being recorded if Arsenal would be lifting the trophy at half six, would it?
oh yeah, I'd probably be about 100 miles from my house in a ditch. But yeah, it could get worse. Could get worse. So really,
Yeah,
one down, three more to go. Come on, lads. But yeah,
definitely.
thank you for joining me, and until
No
next
problem.
time, at Spurs.